One of the things that occurred to all of us early on is they have a superhero universe. Why can't we do that in the horror world? This is a No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is the second episode in season 3. We're taking a note from James Wan and making our own episode on The Conjuring into a series. Join us as we discuss popular horror movie franchises. So that opening quote was from James Wan, and it was when somebody had asked him about making his movie The Conjuring, which apparently was just going to be a single horror movie, into a kind of definitely a franchise and almost a greater movie universe with movies like Annabelle, The Conjuring 2, and of course now The Nun. And one of the things that is really interesting is since The Nun has come out, it is going to push The Conjuring to the top spot of the most successful, meaning the highest grossing horror movie franchises out there. So we thought we would talk a little bit today about what makes a successful horror film franchise. And not only that, but what makes a movie a good candidate for a franchise, or I guess franchisable. Is that a word?
It is now.
All right.
Well,
So-
I think I can wrap this episode up for you. We'll be done right now. What makes a successful horror franchise? Money. Dinero.
Clever.
The end, right?
Money on the front end and money coming in when it comes out.
Well, I am curious because I think of some of my favorite horror movies, especially with some of my favorite ones that I've seen recently, and all of them seem to be just a one movie filmmaking adventure. Like they were just intended to be one movie, and I really don't see a franchise in the future for them. In fact, I will go out on a limb and say some of my favorite ones I think would be ruined by being turned into a franchise, because I like that they have a certain even though they may have an open ending, there's a certain kind of uncertainty, if that makes sense. I think about a movie like The Invitation, or It Comes at Night, or even The Babadook. They wrap up so well in their storytelling, and even though some of them, like The Invitation in particular, kind of leave something at the end to open it up to something greater, I would be upset if they tried to explore that. Like, I like that it was just this kind of one perfect thing. So I'm really curious about movies that directors and filmmakers do decide to make into more movies. And besides wanting to make money, which I can certainly understand that, I'm wondering what it is about these movies that really do scream, we need more of these, or at the very least, what makes it possible.
Well, I mean, I was being flippant when I said money, but I do honestly think money is a part of it, of course. No studio is going to greenlight a film that they don't think will make money. But, I mean, I as you were talking, I was thinking the same thing, but most of my favorite horror movies tend to fall into the one-off sort of thing. I think maybe one of the few exceptions on my end would be Dawn of the Dead, and just several of the other Romero movies, but those are sequels that aren't entirely sequels so much as they're self-contained stories that take place in the same world, since they don't feature any of the same characters generally. But I mean, I keep going back to what was at the top spot before The Nun, which is the Alien franchise, and at least with the first couple of Alien movies, it was a radical shift in the storytelling each time for the first 3 movies, for sure. And so it didn't feel like just the shameless money grab of, say, Jason 53, or whatever. You know, like it felt like there was an actual artistic reason. Like, hey, we have more story to explore in this universe. We have more interesting things to tell. And I say this because we have Hulu, and with several of the shows we've been watching on Hulu, because Hulu is great at serving you the same ads over and over, I've seen the ads for the new Predator movie countless times, and it just seems, at least to me, based on the trailer that I've seen, like a movie that didn't really need to happen. Like, it doesn't seem like it's doing anything interesting with the character of the Predator or the characters he's hunting. So I'd say, to answer your question, like, first and foremost, to make it a good franchise, it's got to be adding to this universe and adding to this mythology of its universe in a substantial, in a good way, you know, not just rehashing the same formulaic plot. I mean, when you get to, you know, I say Jason 53, but, you know, a lot of the Friday the 13th movies and Nightmare on Elm Street are pretty similar when you boil it down to it. There's a man and he's trying to kill a bunch of teenagers, and then he does kill a lot of them, and then they think they get him, but they don't. And, you know, those are fun movies, but I don't know that they're doing anything substantial to make me care about Jason or Freddy or any of that, you know?
Yeah, I was thinking the whole time you were talking, Matt, and I completely agree, because it seems like if you want to make a franchise, you either, if it's going to work, you either have to have new things to say or a universe that's so big you can explore other things. But even then, we talked about how we didn't know if we wanted to see the Annabelle movies or The Nun, you know, when we were talking about The Conjuring. And that actually is attempting to do different parts, like not just the same thing over and over again. But yeah, I was also thinking, like, there's only so many times you can do one thing. Like, there's only so many times you could do Saw, or there's only so many times you can do the Killer. And even some of these franchises on the Forbes list, like, I've only seen the first movie, and I'm fine with that. Like, I don't feel like I need to see the other 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. Like, I see Exorcist. You really do see the other one. I saw the first Paranormal Activity, kind of liked it. I didn't really feel the need to see the other ones. It's kind of, I don't know, I feel like I kind of turned some of these franchises into a single movie just because I was like, I saw that, and I don't know, like, how many times can I keep doing the same thing? If they kept doing The Conjuring with the Warrens, aside from all our problems with the Warrens, it'd just be ghost hunters doing a different investigation every movie. Eventually you get tired of it, you know, and maybe it's interesting to bring the nun and all that into it, but eventually it's just kind of like, I know what I'm going to get when I go see the same sequels to something.
Well, I guess one other thing to take into account is that maybe obviously our taste is different than, you know, we don't have the same taste as everybody on the planet, because I just kept thinking, you know, rehashing the same plot over and over again is not appealing to us. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Lisa, but I feel pretty confident in saying that as well for you. But we do live in a world where there have been 8 Fast and the Furious movies, where there have been multiple Transformers movies, which all seem to basically have the same plot. And Fast and the Furious involves cars and some sort of heist, and I mean, but they're formulaic, and people go and watch these formulaic movies. So I guess there are people that maybe feel comfort in the formula, like they like the jump scares of Freddy and Jason, and so they know it's going to be similar to the last one, so let's just go do it because it's similar. I mean, I'm trying to put myself outside of my own shoes here because, like I said, after I've seen the first one or two, I'm like you, Mel. I like the first couple Nightmare on Elm Streets and Friday the 13th, and I'll watch any of them, but I'm not, you know, I don't love them. Not in the way that I would love, say, like, well, you put me on the spot, The Babadook, you know, something like that. Anyway, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate.
Well, you know, you bring up an interesting point, Matt, because when you're talking about the types of successful horror franchises, you know, there seems to be 2 different types of franchises at work. The first is everyone liked the first one, so let's remake it over and over again, right? Like you mentioned, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, to some degree, the Saw movies, even though that kind of follows different characters in kind of an interesting way. Although I don't love them, especially by the end of those. But I think there is some comfort in the formula, but I think especially with Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, which are like the big horror franchises, and listeners, I know we're skipping over a huge one. I'll just go ahead and put it out there that we're saving Halloween. So don't get frustrated that we're not discussing it right now. But Halloween does kind of fit in this category too, because when you're talking about those movies, it's not only that it's something comfortable, but I think one of the words that you really missed there, Matt, and I think you were heading in this direction, is there's this huge nostalgic value to these movies. So it's not just I want to go see this because I enjoyed it the first time and there was a jump scare, but for a lot of us, and I don't want to again speak for all of America here, but I feel like for a lot of us, those kind of movies, they have that nostalgic value to them because we watched them at a certain point in our life, or for a lot of us, they were the first movies that introduced us to the horror genre, or, we have memories of watching them as kids at Halloween time or something like that. And so I think that's another reason. I don't think a lot of the Friday the 13th after like the first two were really great. But you know what? At Halloween, when they're on TV, I will sit down and watch them. Same thing with Halloween. Some of those movies are just downright bizarre. And I will still sit down and watch them when they come on TV because I'm like, oh, I love the Halloween movies. I love the Friday the 13th movies. I love Nightmare on Elm Street. And that's one type, I think, of franchise, and probably why it's successful is because it's just so iconic. Anyone who sees Jason's mask knows where that's from. I think the other type of movie, and this is one that maybe The Conjuring might fit into, and Mel, I think you were kind of hinting at it, that they didn't just rehash the first one, is that it introduced a universe that was wide enough that they could really pursue any story they wanted to. So with the kind of framework of the Warrens, they had that paranormal museum that they could then look at, like the Annabelle doll or the nun painting, and presumably there is now endless storyline. And same thing with Dawn of the Dead, Matt, that you mentioned. There is endless storyline there because if there's a worldwide zombie apocalypse, you can always zoom out and then zoom in somewhere else in the world and see what, another group of people is doing. And it suddenly becomes a new movie. It becomes a fresh movie, whether you're looking at people in a mall or, people in some sort of military bunker. It can become its own thing because the universe is so broad.
Yes.
Sorry, I went on a tangent.
No, you're fine. Like, as you were talking, I was like, oh, I need to make sure to point out the Romero movies, and then, of course, you pointed it out for me, and so I was ready to jump in, and then you took the wind out of my sails. One thing I do want to mention, though, is because we've mentioned this Forbes list, and we've kind of mentioned it in as a tangent or just kind of, afterthought almost. I'm definitely going to make sure that we have a link to this in the show notes. So those of you listening, if you click on the show notes, you'll be taken to this article, so you can look right with us. But I wanted to mention, because it lists 13 of these franchises, the 13 most successful 13 highest grossing horror film franchises of all time is what they have. And this is based on box office score. And I was just going to point out, speaking of Romero and his zombie films, they didn't make the cut. They're not in the top 13 at all. And I mean, 13 does seem like a rather arbitrary number unless you're going for that, Friday the 13th sort of thing, which I'm sure is intentional. But makes me a little sad that, the King of Zombies isn't even on this list. But did we want to talk about just kind of some of the items that are on this list so that listeners who don't want to click the show notes or who might be in a car or something while listening to this?
Yeah, we could run through them.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Matt. I was pretty shocked that wasn't on there because number 13 is Underworld, and I would have thought for sure that the Romero zombie films would have fit before Underworld. So that was a little surprising to me.
Well, and these are, I mean, their criteria, and let's be fair to the authors here, is that they're using the gross box office
True.
take. And so, you know, the first two Romero, hell, the first three Romero zombie movies probably would not have grossed much at the box office. They really developed that cult status, and especially Night of the Living Dead, once he lost the copyright and it was able to be put on, you know, anybody could include it in an anthology of horror movies for, you know, peanuts. So, I mean, you know, it's not making as much money, even if it is a very well-known film. So that might have kind of put its finger on the scales a little there. But yeah, Underworld. Yeah. Should we discuss whether or not we think it's a horror movie? Because
it's kind of dark fantasy, isn't it? I mean,
that's what I'd call it. I mean,
that's what I kind of thought.
Just because there's vampires and werewolves doesn't make it a horror movie. I mean, just, you know, look at Twilight. The only thing scary about that is that it was made.
Aww.
Ouch.
Sorry. I gotta get my digs in at Twilight. You know this.
At least it's not on the list.
That's true.
That is.
I don't think I would have even mentioned a Forbes list that included that.
But I will say this. I mean, Underworld, I would not call, like, any of the movies, and I've seen like the first two, maybe three, or at least part of the third. And I know that there's more than that. There's a total of 5. But, I mean, I didn't hate the first movie. It wasn't, I wouldn't, by any stretch of the imagination, call it a horror movie. It was more, like you said, Mel's dark fantasy action movie more than anything. For what it was eye candy, you know? I mean, it was lots of fight scenes and, you know, superhuman people doing superhuman stuff, and, you know,
Kate Beckinsale in shiny black pants.
Yeah, I mean, it was not, there was nothing about that movie that was in any way close to making me scared. But, you know, I didn't hate it. I wouldn't put it on my, you know, top 10 list of movies or anything, but, you know, I watched it and liked it enough to watch the second one. But yeah, it does feel like an odd inclusion as far as horror movies go. But
I mean, I guess werewolves and vampires are tried tropes of horror literature, so this is kind of adjacent, or, you know, to that genre.
Oh, I like that, horror adjacent. I like that. I'm definitely using that phrase in the future, just so you know. Mark it down right now. That's where it was coined.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with y'all. It's horror adjacent. What is a horror movie though is number 12, which is Final Destination, which I find very interesting. That I don't know. I would have thought maybe Final Destination was higher, honestly. It just seems like it made a. It seems, I'm stuttering over myself trying to talk about this movie. It seems like it was made to be a blockbuster.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I kind of thought that it would be higher than that, because it seems like every time one of those movies comes out, you just think blockbuster. I didn't know it came from an X-Files script.
Yeah, apparently that it was an unproduced spec script for the X-Files TV series, and I guess they didn't use it, so it became its own movie. But, you know, Final Destination is one of these movies to me that it makes sense on a intellectual level why it makes a good franchise. Because death is a character that you cannot kill, and everybody has to confront death, so there is going to be an endless cast of characters that you could recycle. You know, I know the kind of Rube Goldberg type death machine can get kind of old, because at some point you just start watching it thinking, you know, how is this person going to die? But they could do really interesting things with the characters that they choose to follow. Not that they always did, but they could.
Exactly. Well, I mean, you say it's like blockbuster material, and I mean, I think that was the intention, but it's a teenage horror movie. You know, this is really aimed at like kids in high school or middle schoolers sneaking in. The same way that I Know What You Did Last Summer and its sequel or two were the same thing. And I mean, I remember being in middle school and seeing I Know What You Did Last Summer. That may date me a bit there, but I mean, I saw it in the theater. I should specify, but maybe that's what just has it so low on the list, is that, you know, since we're just looking at box office take, that, you know, it's not going to be as big of a blockbuster because it wasn't as culturally a touchstone like some of the other movies. It was more marketed and geared towards teenagers, because I remember seeing previews for the first one, and it was very definite. It was like, you know, the ads were on MTV and, you know, in front of other movies that I was already seeing at that age, and so maybe that might be what's keeping it so low on the list.
You know, I kind of think, now that I'm thinking back to it, because I really enjoyed the first one when I saw it, and I remember when it came out in the theaters too, and I'm going to go ahead and say that I think if this had been a one-off movie and they had never done anything else, I think it would have been more of a classic than we think of it. Because I think in my head, I dismiss it kind of exactly like you described it, Matt, as, well, this was meant to be a blockbuster. It was meant to be a franchise. It was meant to be marketed to teenagers. It's just kind of a throwaway group of films. But I think if only that first one had been made, it might be higher on my list of favorites.
Well, and it's a great premise. You know, don't get me wrong there. It's a great idea for a movie. I think once you've had 5 of them, like you said, these Rube Goldberg death machines, it really becomes less interesting. And especially after you get past the first 1 or 2, it becomes more like, oh, okay, I get it. They're going to die. Okay, now how are they going to die? And that becomes more of what you're watching for than for the actual, like, horror side of it. It becomes the thrill of how are they going to kill these people sort of thing.
Right.
But...
Well,
oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the deaths in the first one were genuinely shocking. You know, I mean, you were watching it unfold. Like, I remember the scene with the teacher, and she's packing up her things because she's been through this horrific event of watching most of her students and some colleagues, you know, explode in an airplane, and she's packing up in her house, and that scene was rough to watch. Before I really knew what Final Destination, like what kind of movie it was. But then once you know what kind of movie it is, it does take away that. I think you lose connection to the deaths, and you're just watching to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, it becomes more of a thrill ride. It's less of a,
right.
We're not going to scare you. It's a roller coaster now. I mean, it's still got its adrenaline, but in a different form.
Right. Yeah. That's a roller coaster. That's a good way of describing it.
I could also see Final Destination being a big rental.
Right.
Yeah, I know this is gross box office, but I'm like, that seems like one that would get rented over and over again.
Yeah, definitely. That's the sort of thing that you would rent on a Friday, Saturday night with your friends, or, you know, your girlfriend or whatever, and yeah, or boyfriend, you know.
Mm-hmm. All right, so number 11 is Resident Evil.
I'm sorry.
Oh, such a sigh.
Sorry.
Okay, well, Matt, now you've got to let us know what that was about.
Resident Evil. Where to begin? Let's start with video games being turned into movies are rarely a good thing. It does happen, but it is rare. I loved the Resident Evil games. I remember them creeping me out to no end, like doing a sleepover with a friend of mine and us staying up all night and playing it, and by the end we couldn't go to sleep because we were so freaked out. And so like the first Resident Evil movie was okay. Didn't love it, didn't hate it. It was all right. It did some interesting stuff. But man, that franchise went off the rails. Like, the second one is more of an action movie that happens to have zombies in it, and then after that they're like, Mia Jovovich, let's just make her an action star with zombies, and oh yeah, it's yeah. I mean, I couldn't suppress the sigh because I just don't like the movies that much. I mean, they're not bad movies, but they're not horror. They don't scare me, and they're just like, I don't know. It's I can't even think of a good analogy. There's something that I wouldn't willingly watch again unless it was on like TBS on a Saturday afternoon and I was bored.
Well, there you go. There's a high endorsement from Matt. We'll watch on TBS if I'm bored.
To be fair, that's the reason why I love the movie The Rock, because it was always on like USA or TBS, and so I watched it like 1,000 times, and I love that movie. But yeah, Resident Evil, it's... Listeners, if you're fans, don't hate me, but for me it's like Bruno Mars. I'm not going to seek it out, but I'm not going to turn it off if it's on. So... Yeah,
like, okay, hating on Bruno Mars now, like
it's not hate. It's not hate. I feel like Resident
Evil. Apathy.
It's apathy. Yeah,
it's. Aww.
I wouldn't put it as hate. I wouldn't put it as love. I would say the Resident Evil movies are substantially mediocre. Yeah, like, and I went with a friend. I think we saw the third or the fourth one. It was my friend's wife's birthday, and they lived a few hours away, and so I went down, hung out with them for the weekend, and we went and saw, I think it was the third or fourth one, in the theater as part of it, and afterwards we were like, I mean, it was alright, it was fun, it was fine. So, yeah, it's alright, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the first, and I saw subsequent ones, but I guarantee you that if I watched them again, it would be like watching the movie for the first time, because I have no memory of any of the movies after the first.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's the same way.
I'm kind of with you on that.
I know one takes place in a desert and one takes place in a city that's walled off, and then there.
See, none of this sounds familiar. So
that's all I got.
Are they pretty close to the video game, or do they just go off in another direction?
The first two borrowed plot points from the video games while also creating new stuff at the same time. And then I haven't played every single one of the games, I'll confess. I've played the first two a lot. But after that, I can't... I don't think so, because I know Resident Evil 4... No. At a certain point, they completely split, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
If that matters to you.
I was just curious.
Yeah, but those are kind of problematic, the whole video game to horror movie format, because they very much follow we're following one main character, and every few minutes or so, something bad is going to pop up. And the main character has to defeat something bad and then move on to the next something bad. There's very rarely a satisfying character arc. I don't want to say there's not any character arc, but there's very rarely a satisfying one, or even a very good reasoning for why the world is the way it is. It's just, let's throw up some creepy stuff and have them fight. Kind of like a Silent Hill or something like that.
Hey, don't hate on Silent Hill. Oh, okay, yeah, that.
No, come on, it's my turn to say meh.
No, I don't love that movie either. Although it did have some good, like, creepy weirdness to it. But I'll be honest, I didn't really play the game a whole lot. So anyway, Silent Hill isn't on the list, so I guess
it is not. Yeah,
we're safe to not bash it.
Yeah. Well, okay, so this is an interesting one. So number 10 is not shocking. It's The Exorcist. And that makes the classic, like, horror, scariest movies of all times. That does not surprise me. But what surprises me, though, is I forget The Exorcist is a franchise.
Same.
Because I just, remember the first, and there were other movies and a TV show. And again, I remember the first. I'm a huge fan of the first. It was, one of the first real proper horror movies I saw. But yeah, I forget that this one is actually a franchise.
I didn't even realize there were 5 of them.
Yeah.
Like, I just was like, whoa. I heard about the TV show, but I don't know anything more than just hearing about it. And I saw the first one, but not all the other ones.
Well, the thing that's weird about it being a franchise is, obviously I've seen The Exorcist, and I've seen The Exorcist 2. It's not a great movie, but it's also got Linda Blair in it, reprising the role of Reagan. She's older, and so it's a direct sequel. Exorcist 3 I have not seen, but I don't know much about it. I remember they had it at Blockbuster when I was a kid, but I never actually rented it. But what's interesting is that 4 and 5 of the 5 films actually came out around the same time, and it was like this weird thing where 2 different studios or production companies had the rights to it, and so like to the film titled The Exorcist, and so these 2 movies came out fairly close together, and I'm looking up the titles of them because it's weird because like they had weird titles. There's Exorcist the Beginning, but then there was another one that was also called like something like Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist. And so yeah, these came out, one in 2004, one in 2005. So yeah, those were in production at the same time essentially. So
I guess the prequel follows the priest or whoever it was that knew in the book where the guy's like in the desert and he has a battle with the demon before he comes back. I guess it's telling that story?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
The Exorcist 3 I'm actually looking up because there's somebody who was in it that I can't remember who was in it, that a decently big name. It was George C. Scott was in it.
Really?
And apparently Samuel L. Jackson had a role in it.
Wow.
So yeah, 1990. Although what's interesting is that it's categorized as a drama/mystery, according to a Google search. So
that's pretty bold, not categorizing anything related to The Exorcist as not horror.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, if it's got an exorcism in it, it should be horror, I would think.
Well, and this is the thing too, like Exorcist comes out in like 74, Exorcist 2 comes out in 77, so they're fairly close together. Exorcist 3 came out in 1990, and like it seems like it doesn't really, there's none of the original cast. It's actually
it was written and directed by the author.
Mm-hmm.
Blatty, yeah.
So yeah, it's almost like this serial killer investigation that also has paranormal aspects to it. So it's not even really, I don't know. I think they were just using that title to try to, that was a money grab if you ask me. But it really has nothing to do, like Reagan's not a character in it. Yeah, it's just its own thing. But yeah, those last 2 were actually, so it is a franchise per se, but one of those franchises
Tangentially.
Yeah, like it's after the first 2, they're not super closely linked.
Interesting. Well, it makes sense because this is one of those universes that is endless, kind of like Death and Final Destination. There are an endless amount of demons that can pop up and possess young girls. So
yeah, and hapless priests.
Although I'm very intrigued by this idea of like some sort of like dark, gritty occult detective, out there tracking down demon possessed serial killers. I would like to see that movie or TV show or book series.
I'm reading the plot of it and it sounds a lot like an occult detective type plot. Huh.
Yeah. I'm just throwing that out there. If there are any writers listening, I think we need a revival of the occult detective.
I agree.
We really do. Yeah. They could even go back to the Victorian ones. Some of their cases would make great contemporary horror movies, mystery movies.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm down. All right. Well, number 9 is Halloween.
I do want to. I want to jump back for just a second because it looks like. Here's the really weird thing about the two Exorcist sequels that are closely linked. Stellan Skarsgård stars in both of them. They're both prequels, and he
What?
And he plays
by two different production companies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I change what I just said. I want the occult detectives to come back, and I want him to play all of the roles. Oh, no. Let's just do an entire cast of Skarsgårds.
Oh, I mean, that'd be great.
Just all of them. All of them.
That would be great. I love Peter Skarsgård, and Bill Skarsgård is creepy. So
Yeah.
anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I was just looking at that on IMDb and was like, wait, his name is on both of these. This is weird.
That was well worth it. That was well worth a trek back.
He was busy that year.
Oh, now I'm just like, I really am. I'm just dreaming of the occult detective series starring all the Skarsgårds. with proper Victorian plot lines. Yeah.
It would be dream casting.
It would be. Okay. All right. Well, number 9 is Halloween. Like I said, we're not going to discuss that really in depth, except we'll just throw it out there that it's out there. Of course, with 10 films and now 11 this year, I guess it's hard not to make a most successful franchise list because that's just kind of, playing the odds, I guess. But number 8 is Scream. So talk about 90s teenage MTV marketed horror movies. I feel like Scream is the most iconic. So again, it doesn't really surprise me. But yeah, there were 4 films, which again is odd because I only remember 3. My memory is bad.
Well, the most recent one came out just a few years ago. They were trying for a reboot, essentially, but like a weird backdoor sort of reboot.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And apparently there's a TV adaptation too.
Yeah, I think it's on MTV, actually.
Huh.
Maybe. I don't know.
Now.
I knew that it existed as a TV adaptation. I haven't seen it, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel old. I feel like Scream was one of those movies that I really loved. I loved the first one.
That was 2005 or 6, right?
The first one? It was like the 90s. It was like 98 or 99.
96.
Oh,
okay.
6.
96. Oh, man.
That's why I said I feel old. Like,
Scream 4 came out 7 years ago, 2011.
Okay.
But still.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was in high school when it came out. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being in high school when the first one came out.
Mm-hmm.
This one surprises me, though, because even though, yes, the first one was enormously successful, this does not seem like it would make a logical franchise in my mind. I guess just because the first one was so aware of itself, and it made sense that they did the sequel kind of poking fun at, I don't know if poking fun is the right word, but again, kind of this self-awareness of, hey, we're making a sequel of a successful horror movie because that's what you do. But then I would have thought it would have ended after the second.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. That, I mean, it is sort of this like meta commentary on slasher movies while itself being a slasher movie. So it definitely makes sense in some ways to have a franchise. But the thing is, because I've seen the first 3, I remember the first two pretty well. All I really remember about the third one was that Jay and Silent Bob have a cameo in it, and it wasn't that great. And so I guess its own meta commentary became too real because it became like the third movie in a horror slasher franchise, which is forgettable, not great.
I do remember seeing the fourth one now that you're talking. Yeah, okay.
I still haven't seen the fourth one. I mean, I kind of wanted to, but I didn't go out of my way to, so obviously I haven't.
Yeah, it obviously did not make a good, big impression on me. I seem to remember liking it more than I thought I would, but that's all I can tell you about that.
That's damning with faint praise.
That's my version of if it's on in the middle of the day, I won't change the channel.
The TBS argument.
The TBS argument. It's why a TV show like Friends is still so popular. Like Scream is like the Friends of the horror world, you know.
Hey, both had Courtney Cox.
That's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
I forgot. Oh, the only thing I've learned this episode is my memory is very bad.
It's because we're old. That's the other thing we learned.
Apparently. Because 1996 was a lot longer ago than I'd care to admit.
I mean, I even tried to revise history there.
Yeah, so number 7, of course. I'll lump these two together. Number 7 is A Nightmare on Elm Street with its 9 films. And number 6, so right before it, beating it out, is Friday the 13th. I'm going to guess just by sheer number alone because there were 12 films of Friday the 13th. And, I mean, these are the ones that are just so iconic. I mean, you can walk around. If you see somebody wearing a T-shirt that says Camp Crystal Lake, you know what it is, even if you haven't seen the movies. I mean, this is driven by pure nostalgia, I think. And they can do anything they want with the Friday the 13th franchise, I think, and people will still go see it. Nightmare on Elm Street, maybe. I didn't enjoy the reboot or the remake or whatever they call it. I guess it would have been a reboot, right? The Nightmare on Elm Street one that they did.
I'm not sure.
No, I didn't know there was a TV series of that too.
Of Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th?
Nightmare on Elm Street. At least that's what it says here in this Forbes article.
Huh. I didn't know about the TV series on that. I knew there was a short-lived Friday the 13th one, but yeah. I was actually going to say what's really interesting to me is looking at this, because each one of these articles, or each one of these entries in this article, they'll not only tell you what the gross box office was, they adjust it for inflation, and they tell you what the highest grossing entry of the franchise was. So Friday the 13th, the highest grossing entry was the first one, the first Friday the 13th movie. Okay,
makes
cool.
Sense. Yeah.
The highest grossing Nightmare on Elm Street, which is really interesting because it can kind of overlap with Friday the 13th, is Freddy versus Jason.
Right.
So
my question is, when they were counting this, did Freddy versus Jason count towards both of them or only Nightmare on Elm Street?
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I'm willing to bet that it counts for both, because I mean it really does. It is both. So I don't know, but that's just hilarious to me that the highest grossing Nightmare on Elm Street film is Freddy versus Jason.
Yeah. that is very surprising to me. Yeah. Although, A Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, that I would say I like that better than the first Friday the 13th. Just personally. I love so much. There's so many things I love about the movie. I love Johnny Depp. I love his death scene.
That is good.
And the added wrinkle of not knowing what's real or not. The dream level. Yeah.
Yeah, that is good. Well, and that's kind of one of those things that to me makes sense that A Nightmare on Elm Street is a franchise. Because again, when you enter into the dream world, I mean, everybody has to fall asleep. And it's that point of like, I mean, there's this almost epic quality about it, you know, because you go all the way back to like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where, you know, his one thing to get immortality is basically not to fall asleep, and he can't do it. And here you have these people who they know what the problem is, and no matter what they do, they can't stay awake, and that is so humanizing. And then it's also mind bending. Friday the 13th, however, you figure at some point people are going to realize that Camp Crystal Lake is a really bad place to hold a summer camp.
I would think.
That's why Jason has to come to Manhattan in, you know, one of the later ones.
Obviously.
Did he go into space too? He did go into space. That was Jason.
He went into space?
Yeah.
No.
Jason
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I haven't kept up on his travels.
Yes, he did go into space.
Oh yeah, yeah.
As all good serial killers do.
They jumped
It's the final frontier.
Keep going. Well, and I'd say I mean, and I think you're right to have started off by lumping these two together, because I think Friday the 13th films and the Freddy Krueger films all fall into the same sort of thing as what we talked about with Final Destination, that after the first one or two movies, it becomes less and less about the horror so much as how is the killer going to kill these people, you know, like what brutal way are they going to kill them. And with Nightmare on Elm Street, you do have, like you said, Mel, that added layer of not knowing what's real with the dream level. And like you said, Lisa, this added thing of, I mean, everybody has to sleep, and so you can't stay awake forever. But, I mean, by the time you get to, like, Nightmare on Elm Street 4 or 5, I mean, you know Freddy Krueger's going to kill a bunch of people, and you're just kind of watching for Freddy Krueger more than the people fighting him. At least I do.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
I don't know if it's part of the nostalgia or what, but they both have very similar themes to them, right? It's like, you know, young people are involved, young people are having sex, so they get killed, or young people are having sex, so someone died, and you have to seek vengeance. And so the summer camp idea, or, you know, kids in high school, or this kind of like, the story of the kid who drowned, or the story of the kid who was killed, like it plays, I think, right into the age bracket of people when we remember we watch these films, and that probably keeps it going too.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, I feel like, you know, talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, Mel, you're absolutely right. This kind of like nostalgia for these movies. Because especially this time, we're recording this in the middle of September, and you know, it's Halloween season in my mind, September 1st. So when we hit this time of year, September, October, I really want to sit down and watch these movies. I just enjoy them. You know, I enjoy them. It is comforting is the word I'm looking for. They're almost like a comforting horror movie at some point. But just to kind of run down the other movies that beat them out for number one, because they're not number one. And we have talked about most of these movies in previous episodes, so I don't think we need to give any in-depth discussion to these, but just in case our listeners want to know, number 5 is Paranormal Activity. And number 4 is Jaws, which I cannot argue with. I find interesting, though, that those films did better, like Jaws with only 4 films did better than Friday the 13th with 12. So I think that says something to the quality of Jaws. Number 3 is Saw. Of course, there's 7 films there. We've talked about that kind of here and there, though. Number 2, The Conjuring, which I'll just go ahead and put an asterisk on that, because this is actually the 2017 list for Forbes. They haven't put out their 2018 list yet, at least not that I've seen. But The Conjuring is probably number 1 at this point after The Nun. And then Alien. So it's knocking Alien, and it's 8 films out of the running for highest grossing horror franchise. So very interesting. And Matt, I know you had mentioned that they had kind of arbitrarily stopped it at 13, I guess, for the spooky factor. But they did mention that 14th and 15th place would have been The Ring and The Purge. So those are kind of the top ones. Some of those are really surprising to me that didn't make it on there. But I guess we'll have to save that for another day. And yeah, I enjoyed going through these movies, and I hope y'all enjoyed listening.
Is that the end?
I think so.
Yes.